Hey everybody, welcome to day 2 of the Society for Neuroscience conference. It is Sunday. It's Sunday, November 11th, and it was a lot of stuff happening today. I kind of generally stuck more towards the posters, but I did go to an epigenetics seminar in the afternoon, so I'll talk mostly about the posters that I saw and the research kind of going on and the general trends I saw in the cognitive and animal model side of things. So let's get started. The first poster that I went to that I really want to talk about is the intermediate swim stress effects on anxiety behavior. And that was by Christopher Lowry, or I think that's who it was by. It was the first name on the thing. So hopefully that was the guy talking, because he was really cool. And it was really cool to me because it tried a new type of model for post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really difficult to do in animal models because there's nothing that really in animals can model the symptoms you see in post-traumatic stress disorder patients, meaning cognitive impairments only given the negative affect stimulus. Fear conditioning sort of kind of gets on that, but it's not the same. And so they developed a new animal model for post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really cool. Basically, it utilizes an animal, it basically stresses the animal in a water environment to create these anxiety-like behaviors only in reference to the stimulus that kind of caused the anxiety, or only in reference to the stimulus that was causing the stress. So post-traumatic stress disorder patients, you only see cognitive impairments in a traumatic event, when you only see anxiety-like traits in that when presented with a traumatic stimulus. So I thought that was really cool, and that they're trying to really, and it was a new model that I hadn't seen before, really trying to represent post-traumatic stress disorder. Another cool poster I saw was from University of Kentucky by Aaron Miller, and the title is Direct Sub-Second Measures, Tonic and Phasic Glutamate in the Prefrontal Cortex of the Awake and Spontaneously Hyperactive Rat. And what was neat about this for me is it really tries to look at ADHD in a molecular way. And what she did was she essentially really honed in on glutamate's role in hyperactive rats by having them testing the electrochemistry with a probe, essentially in their brain for an extended period of time, while monitoring their hyperactive behavior in an open field box. So that was really cool that she kind of tried to tie in this molecular and behavioral thing at the same time, which you don't often see. Another really cool poster was by Courtney Galvis Bloom, and it was on the effects of antipsychotics in non-human primates. And for me, obviously, this is really cool because this is kind of where my area of research lies. I look at the chronic effects of fluoxetine on monkeys, and so this is definitely a very relevant and very cool thing for my research, so that I would share with you. What she did is she looked at older healthy monkeys, and she gave the monkeys antipsychotics for schizophrenia. She used ketamine and olanzapine, and she used ketamine by itself and an olanzapine with combination, and she saw decreases in working memory, saw decreases in visuospatial memory, saw decreases in spatial search, saw decreases in sustained attention, and no improvement of this decrease in sustained attention with the addition of risperidone. So it seems like these cognitive defects aren't being solved by pharmaceuticals that would normally fix these effects. We also saw impairments on working memory, which was also not reversed by risperidone. So the implications of that meaning these drugs are having very adverse effects in the people taking them, and they're impairing all sorts of cognitive function, and thereby decreasing their quality of life to a point where they can't really function. And so it makes sense why a lot of people don't refuse the medication, because they come with all of these very cognitive-based side effects, not seeming to be reversed by other pharmaceutical methods. So that's a really interesting concept where we have we're having a problem with treating patients without having adverse cognitive side effects that are so adverse that they just stop taking the medication. One of the interesting problems that I often get when dealing with people asking me about my research, and I'm sure she dealt with a lot, is that she's looking at healthy animals and not schizophrenic animals, and there's no really way to assess if these cognitive effects are actually present in the animals that are actually being treated. And so that's a problem that I hear a lot, and it's a problem that I'm sure all monkey scientists hear a lot. And I think it's a real interesting problem that scientists need to think about and get around. I don't really know how, so I would love to hear a discussion of what you guys think about the situation of not being able to use a disease model in one of the most kind of upper tier animal models that we have. Interesting study I saw was high fat increasing impulsivity in mice, I believe it was. So I saw a lot of posters that used high fat diet and looked at cognitive impairment due to the high fat diet. But what I didn't see, which is kind of annoying, was what type of diet they were, or the type of fat they were giving the animal. Because omega-6 and omega-3 fats are very different. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory, allegedly, and omega-3 is considered anti-inflammatory. And as this conference has really been pulling out, is that microglial activation in the brain from an inflammatory response is causing a lot of psychotic symptoms, like immobility or lack of attention or lack of motivation. So we see a lot of microglia activation and inflammatory markers being involved in a lot of cognitive-based behaviors, and we're seeing high-fat diets also seeing similar cognitive impairments. And nobody that I talk to really seemed to look at inflammation for a possible mechanism or reason for their high-fat diet effect. And I think that would be really interesting if somebody did that, for the record. So if you're watching and you find this helpful, yay. And so that was kind of like the big general theme I saw this morning was animal-based behavior. I saw there were a lot of people geared towards the visual side of the visual mapping systems. I know a lot of people were really interested in a couple posters about the visual mapping locations in the brain of rats versus humans versus, I think there was a bat poster as well, using echolocation and their mapping of space in a 3D dimension and how we use sound and sight and the different implications of that. That was a really popular theme, I think. There weren't a lot of posters, but I think the posters that were there were definitely getting talked to, and there were always a lot of people near them. So, and then I went to a talk in the afternoon called Transgenerational Epigenetics and How It Affects Behavior, and that was given by Tracy L. Bell. And she was a great talker. I think the talk itself was actually really interesting, and she talked about how you need to define a transgenetic effect and how it has to affect at least 3 generations before you can consider it a transgeneration effect, and how epigenetics really relates to that transgenic effect and how that transgenic effect relates to behavior. What was really interesting was that males were at greater epigenetic risk at prenatal times, whereas females were at more epigenetic risk at postnatal times, which is actually a really interesting concept because you have a toxicology exposure that only affects at a certain time period. And the idea is that if you're exposed at a certain time, this chemical will cause certain effects, but if you're exposed at another time, then it won't cause the effects. So it was really an interesting idea about sex-specific effects, and that's due to epigenetic changes. So I think that would be a really interesting direction. I know somebody at my university, Michelle Lamerrill, looks at epigenetic effects of DDT exposure and how that affects metabolic syndrome, and I think it's really cool how, and she also sees a lot of sex-specific effects, whether it be pre- or postnatal exposure, and I think it's really interesting to see how that could be related into research and in society. So, fun little fact if you didn't know. Poster on effects of increased blood-brain barrier permeability in soldiers considered with post-traumatic stress disorder. Downside with that, his baseline wasn't very reliable. Looking at a very acute measure of stress and how it affects state measures of anxiety, state measures of depression, and how it was very in the moment, in the time, and how it very acutely affects blood-brain barrier permeability, and also gastrointestinal permeability. So the idea is that if you're more permeable in your gastrointestine and your brain, you're introducing all of these chemicals you normally wouldn't, and therefore you may be at higher risk for a certain toxicological exposure. And if you're on the field, that could potentially lead to cognitive deficits as well. And that's not very good if you're trying to stay as sharp as possible. So I think there's a lot of room for study and in-depth research in that area, and I'm interested to see if where that will go. Yeah, and I think that's kind of it for what I want to talk about today. If you guys have any questions, comments, or feedback, please leave in the comments, and I will get back to you very, very as quick as I possibly can. Yeah, so I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.